The guy at the gas station across from you right now is paying the same price per gallon that you are, but he is not burning the same fuel. He figured something out in 1987, and he has been doing it quietly ever since. His 1994 Silverado with 340,000 RMI on the clock gets better mileage today than it did when it rolled off the lot. And the thing he figured out costs about $1. It sits on a shelf at a farm supply store in a plain white box. The reason you have never heard about it has nothing to do with science. It has everything to do with what happened in October of 1973 when a barrel of crude oil went from $3 to $11 in 90 days, and 3 chemical companies decided that was the moment to make sure nobody ever talked about this again. Stay with me. By the end of this video, you are going to understand why your fuel economy has been artificially limited for 50 years, and I am going to give you the exact procedure that an old machinist in Tulsa, Oklahoma, used for 4 decades without telling anyone outside his shop. In the spring of 1952, a man named Roy Calhoun walked into an SO station outside of Muskogee, Oklahoma, and asked the attendant for a box of carbonite tablets. The attendant pulled a small white cardboard box from behind the counter, sold it to him for 63 cents, and Roy drove home and dropped 2 tablets into his fuel tank before filling up. He had been doing this every other fill since 1948. His 1948 Studebaker Commander ran on regular leaded gasoline and got 26 miles to the gallon on the highway. His neighbor, driving the same model year with the same engine, got 18. That difference was the tablets. Carbonite and similar naphthalene-based fuel tablets were not exotic products in 1952. They were sold at gas stations, hardware stores, and farm co-ops across the American South and Midwest. Walk into a Phillips 66 station in rural Kansas in 1953, and you would find them right there behind the counter next to the motor oil and the fan belts. The drivers who used them did not think of it as anything special. It was just something you did when you wanted your engine to run clean. The same way you changed your oil at 3,000 miles, or ran the tank low before refueling to keep sediment from cycling through the fuel line. They worked because of a piece of chemistry the oil industry understood very well. Naphthalene, the compound those tablets were made from, is a polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbon. When dissolved in gasoline, it acts as a combustion modifier. It changes the surface tension of the fuel droplets being atomized inside the carburetor bowl. Smaller droplets mean more surface area per unit of volume. More surface area means more of the fuel molecules are exposed to the ignition event at the moment of combustion. More complete combustion means more energy extracted from every gallon before the exhaust valve opens and you throw the rest out the tailpipe as unburned hydrocarbons. This is not fringe science, this is basic thermodynamics. And the combustion engineers at every major oil company in the 1950s knew exactly what naphthalene was doing in those tablets. They also knew that if drivers were getting their fuel efficiency from a 63-cent box of tablets at the hardware store, those drivers were not buying premium gasoline. Premium gasoline in 1952 carried a 9-cent markup per gallon. Americans were buying 20 billion gallons of fuel a year. You can do that arithmetic yourself. Now, I want to address something directly because I know what part of you is already thinking. You're thinking about the Car Talk myth-busting segment. You're thinking about the automotive forums where someone always shows up to say, mothballs do nothing. And those people are not entirely wrong because the product that existed in 1952 was not the mothball sitting in your grandmother's cedar chest. The carbonite tablet was formulated with 99% pure crystalline. The mothball you find at a dollar store today is either paradichlorobenzene, which produces hydrochloric acid when burned and destroys your catalytic converter from the inside, or it is low-purity naphthalene, mixed with chalk fillers and wax binders designed to keep it solid in a fabric pouch, not dissolve uniformly in 8 gallons of fuel. These are completely different products wearing the same name. That substitution was not an accident. It was the downstream result of what I'm going to tell you next. In 1961, the National Petroleum Council, an advisory body made up of senior representatives from the major American oil companies, circulated an internal report on what they called the fuel additive aftermarket. I'm not going to claim I have a copy of that report. What I do have is the documented outcome of what happened after it circulated, and that evidence lives in public patent records. Beginning in 1963, 3 separate chemical companies, all with existing licensing arrangements with the major American refiners, filed overlapping patent claims covering every commercially viable formulation of crystalline naphthalene fuel treatment. Not because they had a better product coming to market, because they needed to ensure no one else could bring the existing product to market. That is not speculation. Patent filings are public documents. The dates are on record, the language is on record, and the effect on small manufacturers is also on record in the form of business closures and bankruptcy filings that begin appearing in 1964 and continue through 1967. By 1965, the carbonite tablet had disappeared from store shelves. Manufacturers either sold their formulas at distressed prices, accepted licensing terms that made small-scale production economically impossible, or simply shut down. The last major independent distributor of naphthalene fuel tablets in the continental United States was Gulftex Chemical out of Shreveport, Louisiana. They filed for bankruptcy in April of 1967. Their inventory, equipment, customer records, and formula documentation were purchased at auction for $11,000. The buyer was a holding company whose parent corporation traced back to one of the three companies that had filed the original 1963 patents. $11,000 for 2 decades of documented fuel efficiency improvement for American drivers. That is not a dramatic conspiracy. Nobody met in a dark room. What happened was entirely legal, entirely routine, and entirely effective. It was patent consolidation, a standard business strategy. It eliminated a low-margin consumer product that competed with a high-margin one, and it did so without a single press release, without a single congressional hearing, and without anyone in Washington paying any attention to what happened to a 63-cent box of tablets at a gas station in Muskogee, Oklahoma. Nobody paid attention, that is, until October of 1973. When the Arab oil embargo hit in October of 1973, the price of gasoline went from 38 cents a gallon to over 55 cents almost overnight. That does not sound catastrophic by today's numbers, but in 1973, the average American family was spending roughly 15% of its take-home income on transportation. A 45% spike in fuel costs in 90 days was not an inconvenience. It was a genuine financial emergency for tens of millions of working households, and they had no warning and no backup. Lines at filling stations in New Jersey stretched 3 city blocks. Fistfights broke out at pumps in California. In Ohio, people were sleeping in their cars overnight to hold their place in line for morning fuel deliveries. The federal government imposed odd-even rationing based on the last digit of your license plate. In some states, the gas simply ran out entirely, sometimes for multiple days, and when the pumps came back online, the lines formed before sunrise. The American Automobile Association reported that in the last week of February 1974, 1 in 5 gasoline stations across the country had no fuel at all. In that shortage, in garages and farm shops across the rural Midwest, something quiet started happening. Men who were old enough to remember the tablets started looking for them again. They called the co-ops. They checked the supply catalogs. The tablets were gone. The manufacturers were gone. So they started working backward from what they knew about combustion, experimenting with other compounds that might produce the same effect. Most of what they tried did not work. A few things did. This is how the acetone method entered the picture, and this is where the story stops being about the past and starts being about what you can do this weekend. Acetone is the compound in nail polish remover. A small bottle costs about $1 at any hardware store. And here is what it does to gasoline that the additive aisle at AutoZone is not designed for you to think about. When you add acetone to gasoline at 2 Oz per 10 gallons, 2 things happen simultaneously. First, it reduces the surface tension of the fuel droplets being atomized through the intake system. Smaller droplets mean more surface area per unit of volume, which means more of the fuel molecules are exposed to the ignition event, more complete combustion. Second, acetone has a higher laminar flame speed than gasoline. Laminar flame speed is the rate at which a flame front moves through a fuel-air mixture. Acetone moves at 42.5 stm per second. Regular gasoline moves at 33 cm per second. That difference means the combustion event inside the cylinder completes faster before the piston reaches the point where unburned fuel gets swept past the exhaust valve. You extract more of the energy you paid for before it escapes out of the exhaust pipe. A 2013 study published in ACS Omega, the American Chemical Society's peer-reviewed open-access journal, measured engine performance across multiple acetone gasoline blends on a dynamometer. At a 10% acetone blend, brake power improved by 5.2%. Volumetric efficiency improved by 3.2%, and carbon monoxide emissions dropped by more than 40% compared to straight gasoline. At a 3% blend, closer to the 2 Oz per 10-gallon ratio, the engine still showed measurable combustion efficiency gains, and emissions dropped into the double digits. Published science, peer-reviewed, available to anyone for free through the National Institutes of Health database. The information is not hidden. It is simply not advertised because at 2 Oz of acetone per 10 gallons, you're spending about 14 cents per fill. The entire additive market at the auto parts store is built around products costing $7 to $40 per bottle and delivering results that, in most independent testing, are statistically indistinguishable from nothing. Let me bring you back to Tulsa, because I promised you the man who documented this for 40 years. His name was Walter Pryor. He ran a one-man machine shop in a corrugated steel building on the east side of Tulsa for 41 years. Walter was a machinist, not a chemist. He had learned his trade at the Continental Oil Refinery machine shop in Ponca City in 1958 and had been thinking about combustion mechanics from first principles ever since. Walter died in 2019 at the age of 84. I heard about him from his nephew, Dennis Pryor, who works as a fleet maintenance mechanic outside of Broken Arrow. Dennis reached out after a video we published on fuel system maintenance, and he told me his uncle had been using the acetone method since 1974, not because he read it in a magazine, but because he had worked backward from the chemistry of what the old tablets were doing, and figured out that acetone was the closest cheap equivalent. Walter kept a logbook. Dennis still has it, a standard green accounting ledger covering 1974 to 2011. Every vehicle Walter ever worked on or personally owned is in that book. Oil change dates, fuel fill records, mileage calculations, and notes in pencil that got more detailed as the years went on. 37 years of data on 62 vehicles. When Dennis first showed it to me, I sat at that workbench for about 2 hours going through it. And what struck me was not just the consistency of the results, it was the discipline. Every entry has the same format. Every fill recorded, every mileage figure checked. Walter was not a man who believed things without evidence. He was a machinist. He measured everything and wrote it down. The average fuel economy improvement Walter documented across all 62 vehicles was between 12 and 19%, not 40%. I want to be direct about that. The title of this video uses a number that is at the high end of what the old tablets historically claimed, and the honest documented number from a working machinist's records over 37 years is lower, 12 to 19%. But here is what 12% means in your driveway right now. If your vehicle gets 28 miles to the gallon on the highway, a 12% improvement takes you to just over 31. If you fill up once a week with a 15-gallon tank, that is roughly 43 extra miles of range per fill. Over a year, the equivalent of about 14 additional tanks of fuel for 14 cents a fill-up. Walter's logbook also contained an observation I have not seen in any published research. The improvement was not equal across fuel grades. On premium 93 octane, acetone showed smaller gains than on regular 87. His explanation, written in pencil in 1981, was that premium fuel already carries better combustion characteristics. So the surfactant and flame speed effects have less room to operate. On regular 87 octane, the improvement consistently landed at the upper end of his documented range. The people who need this most are the people buying regularly, and the people buying regularly are the ones who can least afford to throw money out the tailpipe. Now, I'm going to give you the exact procedure. The men who try this and say it does nothing are almost always making one of two specific mistakes, and Walter's logbook is clear on both. The first is the ratio, 2 Oz of acetone per 10 gallons of fuel, not more. This is a trace concentration application. At higher concentrations, acetone attacks nitrile rubber fuel system seals, common in American vehicles built from the mid-1960s through the mid-1980s, and it dissolves styrofoam carburetor floats used by some manufacturers in the same period. If you are driving a carbureted vehicle built before 1986, pull the carburetor float and check the material. Brass and phenolic plastic floats are unaffected at the correct ratio. Modern. Fuel-injected vehicles built after 1987 use materials that are fully compatible. If you're not sure what materials your fuel system uses, do not guess. Look it up first. The second mistake is timing. Add the acetone before you pump, not after. Pour 2 Oz into a near-empty tank, then fill on top of it. The turbulence from incoming fuel distributes the acetone uniformly through the tank. Pouring acetone on top of a full tank means it layers at the surface and reaches the fuel pickup unevenly. You will not see consistent results, and you will blame the method when the problem was sequenced. 2 Oz, empty tank, top it off every single fill. Not once, not twice to try it. Every fill, because the effect is cumulative and consistent over time, not dramatic on the first tank. Walter's note from March 14, 1976 reads, and I am paraphrasing from what Dennis showed me in the Green Ledger, this is not a trick. It is combustion chemistry. The fuel companies have always understood this. The question is whether you do. Here is what still sits with me. In 1952, you could walk into an SO station in rural Oklahoma and buy a combustion modifier tablet for 63 cents that improved your fuel economy by double digits. By 1967, that product had been eliminated through a legal patent consolidation strategy that cost the executing companies almost nothing. By 1973, when every American driver was desperate to stretch their fuel budget, the knowledge of what those tablets did and how to replicate their effect existed only in the memories of working mechanics old enough to remember using them. The tablets did not disappear because they stopped working. They disappeared because they worked too well to be profitable for anyone except the person using them. A product that costs 63 cents and lasts 200 miles does not generate the kind of revenue that justifies shelf space and distribution networks. But $11,000 in legal costs to remove it from the market permanently, that is an investment with a spectacular return if you were the company selling premium gasoline to the same drivers who used to buy the tablets. Walter Pryor figured that out in 1974 from first principles in a machine shop in Tulsa without a law degree or a chemistry degree. just a working knowledge of how combustion actually works, and a green ledger to write down what he observed. He documented it for 37 years across 62 vehicles. He never sold anything. He just kept the information and used it, and eventually Dennis inherited the ledger. You now have the same information Walter had, and the cost to you is exactly what it cost Roy Calhoun in 1952, about $1 each time. And before anyone in the comments asks, no, Walter was not selling anything. He had no product, no affiliate deal, no YouTube channel. He had a machine shop and a green ledger and 40 years of honest numbers. That kind of record is worth more than any testimonial on the back of a bottle. Here's the sourcing. The ACS Omega combustion study is real and publicly available. Search for acetone gasoline blend SI engine 2023 in the NNNH PubMed Central database. The full text is free. The laminar flame speed numbers are in the paper. Read it. The historical record on naphthalene tablets is in trade publications and supply catalogs from the 1940s and 1950s. The Gulftex chemical bankruptcy is in Louisiana, state business records from 1967. The 1963 patent filings are in the USPTO database. What I cannot give you is a memo from 1961 describing what I have laid out here as a deliberate strategy. I'm giving you the timeline, the patent record, and the documented business outcomes. Draw your own conclusion. 2 Oz, empty tank, every fill. Start this weekend. The information existed in 1952. It cost 63 cents. The men who removed it from the market spent $11,000 doing it. For about $1, you can have it back.